The arts are a powerful gift for expanding Christian mission, but not in the way that relationship is commonly conceived. Within contexts where the arts are embraced as a companion of faith and transformation, the emphasis is often placed on doing mission through or with the arts, with examples ranging everywhere from the Jesus film to the growing field of ethnomusicology. But what these approaches often take for granted or fail to recognize is the ability for the arts to transform our missional imaginations and practices as a whole. In other words, the arts do not merely serve pre-established goals and practices. They can transform what we imagine those goals and practices to be. To unpack this idea, we first need to understand the enormous pressures of reductionism in our modern world. Whether we realize it or not, we are conditioned to reduce the enormous complexity of life into manageable pieces. Fueled by the power of technology and the busyness of contemporary life, reductionism has become an established feature of our social and missional imaginations. We prefer simplicity over complexity, but this is often what theologian and musician Jeremy Begbie calls an exclusionary simplicity that constrains and limits the scope of what needs accounting for. Begbie explores this at length in his book called Abundantly More, The Theological Promise of the Arts in a Reductionistic World. And his basic argument is that we need the arts more than ever because we live in cultures that are increasingly saturated with reductionism, which he calls simplicity in a hurry. This kind of reductionism has also plagued theology, church life, and Christian mission, like we see in the history of reducing mission to either personal evangelism or social action. Beyond this common reduction, the history of mission shows the tendency for Christians to reduce Jesus' command to make disciples and to be his witnesses to certain methods, spheres, and goals to the exclusion of others. For example, there's a tendency to reduce mission to the human realm while excluding the rest of creation, to reduce mission to either an individual task or a systemic one, and to reduce missional expectations to either short-term or long-term transformation. The movement of integral mission has helped to address some of this missional reductionism, but the reductionistic pressures are so pervasive that our imaginations can remain captive to simplistic approaches. In light of all of this, the arts are a gift, not just as a vehicle for mission and a way of illustrating or translating the gospel message, but for developing integrative imaginations and resisting missional reductionism. I want to make a few general comments about how the arts can do this, and then zero in on some specific examples. So if reductionism is what Begbie calls simplicity in a hurry, then one way the arts address this is by slowing us down. You can't take in the beauty of a mural, a piece of music, or a beautiful building quickly. You need to slow down enough to have a genuine encounter with the artwork, to perceive its meaning, to receive all that it has to offer. In doing so, a work of art has the potential to broaden our perception and present ways of imagining, experiencing, and understanding the world that we had not previously encountered. Begbie talks about this as the inexhaustible elusivity of art that contains this overflow of meaning and invites us into an ongoing process of discovery. Like a good metaphor, there's always more for our imaginations to explore when encountering an excellent poem or film, a story, or a painting. The arts train us to expect more complexity and depth than we could ever completely grasp or explain. In fact, the whole point of enjoying a work of art, like a poem, is not to translate it into statements of fact or explain the entirety of its meaning, but to enter its imaginative world and to remain open to the mystery and what Begbie calls the inexhaustible depth of reality. Consequently, the arts can help us enter the inexhaustible depth of Christian mission with an integrative imagination that's resistant to simplistic reductions. One way the arts can help us do that is to integrate the human and the other than human aspects of Christian mission. God's mission includes the liberation of all creation from its bondage to decay, but it's typical for mission efforts to separate the human from the rest of creation, with some organizations and movements focused on the former, some on the latter. But consider the potential of church architecture to integrate the human and other than human in our missional imaginations. Or, by contrast, how some church architecture reinforces the reductionism of human-centered mission. Some church buildings, like the one where I was a pastor here in the US, called Warehouse 242, are designed to take people away from creation into a space devoted to human worship and concerns. There was much to love about this community and the space, but after a few years, I began to realize how this black box church was forming my imagination and the imagination of the whole community. We were being formed to imagine creation as an inert environment to drive through and then leave behind as we entered this space dedicated to worshiping, remembering the story of God, being sent out to join God's mission. But by worshiping week after week in a space cut off from creation, it was easy to bracket out creation as we imagined our role in God's mission outside that space. Even if we proclaimed a different truth at times, the aesthetic environment was forming our imaginations to view creation as little more than the stage on which the human-centered drama of redemption happens. A stage that could be largely ignored while pursuing the primary mission of making disciples. So in this case, church architecture reinforced a dangerous reduction. Other church architecture, by contrast, fosters a more integrative imagination. Take, for example, St. Joseph's Adoration Chapel at Belmont Abbey College. Constructed with attentiveness to the natural landscape, this kind of church architecture invites humans to worship within and alongside the whole community of creation, encountering God through word, sacrament, prayers, song, while gazing out at a sunshine-lit forest, forms worshipers to imagine how God encounters them through creation and how creation also praises God and groans for its liberation from decay. This kind of space can form an integrative missional imagination that views creation as a partner in mission and not merely the stage. This kind of architecture has capacity not only to motivate our care for creation, but also for us to embrace all the ways creation cares for us. The capacity for church architecture to form missional imaginations that are inclusive of creation has ancient and global precedent. One might think of the church forests of Ethiopia, where some of the only surviving forests are those surrounding Orthodox churches. Based on the church's belief in the sacredness of creation and their role as earth keepers, these communities built their churches in the midst of the forest to preserve it, but also brought elements of the forest into the church, such as the beams used to construct the walls or the thick thatch on the roofs. The aesthetic design of these spaces is a constant reminder that humanity and the rest of creation are intertwined within the story and mission of God. I'd like to turn now to a second way the arts can help us resist missional reductionism and form integrative imaginations, namely by bringing together the individual and systemic aspects of mission. Visual art, for example, trains us to see how individual parts are related to an integrative whole. Individual colors or lines may not seem significant on their own, like these lines in Ryan Lotario's work, Alphabet Soup. The individual colors and lines evoke some kind of story, but they really only find their place and meaning within the work as a whole, which portrays a person in agony in the process of trying to find dignified identity in the face of both psychological and social pressures. Lotario's painting helps us see how the human predicament, and therefore the solution, is both individual and systemic. While there's an inherent integration of individual parts and the whole within visual art that can form our imaginations, there are specific artworks that also demonstrate the convergence of individual and systemic spheres of life. A good example of this is Enrique Chiu's Mural de la Hermandad, the Mural of Brotherhood, which is a collaborative mural painted on the Mexican side of the US-Mexican border fence in Tijuana. Chiu began inviting people to contribute to the mural and just express their individual hopes and dreams and beliefs in images and words. More and more people joined the effort, and the mural now covers several miles of the border wall and serves as a beacon of hope for those crossing both ways. Each individual contribution of creativity matters. And because thousands of individuals have participated in this creative mission, the Mural de la Hermandad now has had systemic impact, driving catalytic conversations and policy decisions on both sides of the wall. The mural trains our imaginations to see how the most transformative mission is both individual and systemic. Finally, the arts can be a gift for forming our imaginations to integrate both immediate and delayed transformation within the kingdom and mission of God. Biblically attuned theologians and missiologists acknowledge that the kingdom of God is both already here and not yet fully realized. But in practice, it's common for us to gravitate toward either present-mindedness and immediate results or future-mindedness and delayed results. In my experience, poetry integrates these immediate and delayed dimensions through both form and content. In form, a good poem brings immediate delight as you encounter particular words, phrases, and sounds. And yet a good poem also takes a long time to contemplate and digest. In fact, there's a sense in which a poem is, by its nature, open-ended, continuing to evoke different reactions and meanings over time. In short, poetry is an apt training ground for holding immediate impact alongside lack of closure and the inexhaustible elusivity that Begbie addressed. Some poems also shape our imaginations to embrace the now and not yet aspects of life and transformation by virtue of their theme and content. One good example is Abigail Carroll's poem, How to Prepare for the Second Coming, from her collection, Habitation of Wonder. And I'd like to end by simply reading this poem and letting it work on our imaginations. How to prepare for the second coming. Start by recalling the absolute goodness of rain and repent for every grumble you have ever made about the weather. This will take approximately forever. Next, you will want to commit a theft. With deft lock-picking and shrewd hand, steal back the hours you fed to the hungry god of work. Then squander them on hydrangeas, Wordsworth, voluntary sidewalk repair. Teach a child to lace a shoe, your child or another's, any 4-year-old will do. And while you're at it, set the alarm for 3 and fumble through the dark to the pond to guard the salamanders as they cross the road. If, having accomplished these tasks, you wish to go on, sit at your desk and carefully design a few radical acts of grace, by which I mean murder of a sort. You must willfully, passionately kill the living, breathing debt owed you by those who stole your goods, your rights, or the jewel that was the beating muscle of your hope. Apart from this, you cannot know the full extent of love. For precedent, refer to the cross. Thrust your nails into dirt and plant a few leeks, carrots, radishes perhaps. Indeed, get scandalously intimate with the earth. After all, it is where you will live when the lamb lies down with the lion and the lion has become your friend. And when the water of the new world breaks, all is said and done, heaven and earth made one as the prophets foretold. You will lose each doubt to a song, which is a kind of praise, and reap the good you sowed.